about what we've been doing. Anybody have any questions about anything? Get home and study and say, well, I don't know about this or that. Remember, this class is not about me being the teacher. This class is about a group of Christians coming together and studying God's Word. I'm just trying to facilitate moving us forward. But this class is about all of you, and all of you speaking up and having ownership in it, right? You need to be reading it too. So don't just believe me, because I make mistakes. I'm just a human. So y'all read it too. Check it out. Say, I don't know about that. Right, Missy? Yeah, we like that. We like that. Don't ever think, I don't want to hurt her feelings. Never think that. Bring it up. All we want is for truth to be here. So, we've been talking about Abraham, and who can tell me about the covenant that was made with Abraham, between Abraham and who? Yahweh, that's right. And that's right. Good student. So, what is the covenant? And what is the borders of the land that God gave?
From the river Egypt to the Euphrates.
And so we can't even see the Euphrates on this map. It's somewhere over here down around in the Iraqi area, and all the way over to, we're guessing it's talking about this Nile River, but we don't know for sure. But either way, it controls this Sinai Peninsula. Although there is a small little river called the Wadi somewhere around in here. But has that ever happened yet in history? So, has God failed to keep His promise?
No.
What does that mean? If it hasn't happened yet, and God promised it, what does it mean?
It's gonna happen.
Yet to come. Right. So, does that mean that Israel still needs to be a nation for this to happen? Yes, that's right. So, that's kind of what we're talking about is our role with that. And we ended last week, we were talking about this is the first time in over 2,000 years, since 1948 anyway, that the church and Israel has both existed together. I want y'all to sink that in for a minute, because those of us that were born after 1948, we don't know any different, and we just grew up with that, and we just assume that. But this is the first time in over 2,000 years, right, that this has happened. So, and actually, they didn't even get Jerusalem until later, till 1967. And just until Trump's presidency was Jerusalem recognized as the capital of Israel. So you guys are living right in the middle of prophecy taking place. We're right in the middle of it. And that's why we're talking about it, because I want you to have your eyes open to what comes next. And if the Bible tells us, doesn't it, Suzanne? And it tells us, we heard it this morning, he who has ears, let him hear. He wants you to know these things. Remember last week when we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah? Did God give warning before He did it? He did. And has He given us warning before what's coming to our earth? Has He given that to us? Just in one sentence or a paragraph? This almost entire book is about what's coming. We have no excuse not to know. So we need to be studying it. We need to be studying it with open minds and with open eyes and wanting to learn about it, because it will affect you. It will affect your children. And we talked last week of the importance of training our children up to be ready to fight and what's coming. Now, when I say fight, do I mean let's go out and get some guns and some food and make a compound?
Well,
I know you do. Well, we can still have some compound. We just don't have to have the guns. How about that?
well,
I know. Well,
he's got to come with me.
He might need it for hunting. He might need it for hunting food. But that's not what it's about, is it? It's not about us fighting to live in this world physically. It's about us fighting this spiritual battle. And we will talk about that more and more. But Suzanne, you've already read it. How do we fight that in the end? What are we supposed to do?
Well, we gotta know what's in the Bible.
Yes,
That's the first thing.
that's right. And what does the Bible tell us? Does it say, what does it say about our lives? Does anybody know?
Into death. Endured into death.
Yes.
Willing to-
Stand firm
Stand firm.
and not to love our lives more than Him. And so martyrdom is highly expected. And it is actually what is going to spread the word around the world. So, but when you know going into it that is what God expects of you, it gives you courage. Of course, none of us have been in that situation, so I pray all the time for God to give me courage to do the right thing. I can't say until I get there, about it. But we do pray, and even in our Tuesday morning class, we picked out songs that we can sing in our head, as that time comes to help give us courage. But when you know what God expects of you before you get in that situation, then it helps you to follow through. I do believe. Okay, so we've been talking about Abraham and this covenant. And why is this covenant important?
Well, it's still in existence today. It's the Abrahamic covenant, right? And it's still in existence today.
Are you sure it's not just until Jesus died on the cross?
It's
That everlasting.
But everything.
everlasting covenant.
Okay, it says forever, doesn't it? And then we're going to read on later when it says, as long as there's stars in the sky and as long as there's a moon and a sun, then his love for the people will continue. So we know that is something that's everlasting. And we have to trust God. If we can't trust God with this promise, then how can we trust him that he's coming back for us and having prepared a place for us? So we don't want to excuse it away, because then that excuses away our promise as well. So we have to know who he is, because remember, what we believe about Yahweh determines how we live our life. Are we going to live in fear, in hiding, or are we going to be sure of our promise in him? And that's why it's so good to have a group like this. Because when you're alone and you know these promises, it's harder to stand. But when you have a group of people who you know will stand with you, even to death, that gives you such confidence. And that's why God created a church, so that we can stand together. And so that's what we're doing here. It's about learning this, but it's also about building an army, ready for what's coming in the future. And we need to know it, but we have to study it, and we need to pass it on to our children, because none of us know for sure when this is going to happen. We're seeing things happen right now, but we also know that God can move slowly. So it may be 200 years, might be 50 years. So we have to be prepared and prepare the future generations. And I know when you talk about Abraham, y'all had a lot of questions when we first started about all these ites and all these people around, and how come there's only one line that God, promised. And we're going to be using our dry erase board when we get down to Jacob and talking about all the 12 tribes. So get ready for that. But you're going to see that there is a line that God looked out for. Were they always right? No. Did they make a lot of mistakes? Absolutely. But when God has a will for something to happen, it is going to happen. And where you fall in that is up to you. But all these people around them today, and they're still fighting with them today, are all because of what we're reading right here in the Bible about Abraham. Now, we already discussed Ishmael many times. And do you remember what Ishmael was described as? What God said he would be like a wild what?
Donkey.
So who in here has donkeys? Brandy, do you have a donkey?
I have a donkey.
Beth's not here today. She used to have a donkey. She got a donkey to protect her other animals, because that's how fierce they are. So a donkey is really strong. And nobody messes with the donkey. If the donkey doesn't want to be messed with, he's not messed with. And so and it says wild donkey. So what we have pretty much are domesticated donkeys. So if they're bad, can you imagine a wild one? So what they used to do is they would take a wild donkey and breed it with a domesticated donkey, so that their domesticated breed would be stronger, because the wild ones were so much stronger. So, and it talked about he would be like a wild donkey, and that he would constantly be what? Fighting with his neighbors. Is that not what we've been singing? And this was in like 2000 BC. So for 4,000 years it has continued on. But it's not just Ishmael that we're fighting against. And last week we learned about Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember what happened after they left? That really bizarre story. You remember Lot and his 2 daughters? And they thought they were the last survivors on the face of the earth. And what happened? Yes, and that's where we kind of ended. And that came up with the people of Moab, which is right here, and Ammon. And those are the people of Jordan today. That's the nation of Jordan today, okay? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but it helps when you have a map. I don't want to be like somebody that we know that, was focused on maps, but it does help me understand better when I have a map and I can kind of see where the area is. And so Moab and Ammon over here in Jordan, they're not finished yet. So when you look at these old maps and you think, oh, I don't need that anymore, it's not finished yet. That fight is still going on today. And so we're going to learn about it. And we're going to learn who all these, not all of them, but we're going to learn who some of these ites are so that we can have a better understanding what's going on today. So, Tabitha, remember when we said they changed the name of Israel to what? In Rome AD.
Oh, Palestine.
Palestine, because it was a demeaning mark, because Israel's biggest enemy are the Philistines. Well, that's who these people turned out to be. The Philistines actually came over from Greece, but they were a big fighter with Israel from this time on. And we're going to be reading about the Philistines today and Abraham. And so that is the reason why Rome in AD 70 changed the name, the land of Israel, to Palestine, because they wanted to be derogatory to them, because it came after the Philistines, because they know that the Israelites and the Philistines do not like each other. So when you hear people today talking about Palestine, I want you to think about how God feels about that. What did God name that land? Do you know yet? We haven't learned that yet. God actually came up with the name Israel. And we're going to learn about that when we get to Jacob. We're not there yet. But God actually came up with that. And who really owns that land? It's not really people, is it? God. That's right. And we did not, we're going to get there in the future, but in Deuteronomy, God lists out sections of the world, and that he's putting powers over those sections. And when it comes to Israel, he says, I will oversee that myself. So it is very special to him. The land, the people, the promises, those are all very important to God. And I feel as a group, as Christians, we have not really been taught why and the importance of that. And we know in Jeremiah, later on, it talks about how the people start dividing up the land of Israel, casting lots for this and that. And maybe that's been done somewhat in the past, but we know the United Nations is doing that right now. They're trying to divide it up and casting lots. And guess who's watching that? Yahweh is watching that. And he's going to make people be accountable for that. So we think, oh, I don't have anything to do with what happens in Israel. You do. God knows your heart, and he knows where you're lying with that. He knows which lot you're casting towards to dividing it, to bringing it together. And so he does see. We saw last week, Sarah was laughing at the entrance of the tent. And did God see it? Mm-hmm. And she tried to say she didn't do it, didn't she? What'd he say?
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. I saw you. And so he knows your heart too, sitting here right now. He knows your heart. And where does it lie? And if you're not there yet, that's okay. Because I grew up most of my life not having a heart for Israel. I've already told y'all that story, so I'm not going to tell you again. But I had to repent of that. But God can change that in you through his word, through his Holy Spirit. And reading this is what will do it. Reading this is what will do it. So we were talking about Genesis. We read all the way up to, and again, I know we're not going to read through all of Genesis, although I would love to, because this is the basis of so much of our Christianity. And you really need to spend time in Genesis. I hope you guys are spending time in Genesis. But we do need to read a few of these things. So last week we read about, we just finished about Sodom and Gomorrah. Can somebody remind the rest of the class, how is that parallel to the end times that we're going to be coming through? How is Sodom and Gomorrah parallel to that? We talked about last week.
The wickedness that was fasted.
The wickedness of everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah.
It'll be similar to that one.
How we have to make a choice. Did Lot want to leave?
No.
He didn't. He wanted to stay in the wickedness. And we know that in Revelation, we have verses that talk about that. How in the end, when God's bringing these judgments, that there's people who want to stay in their sin. They know that God is bringing it, but they love their sin more than they love following Yahweh. So they choose to stay in their sin and be judged. That's kind of what we saw with Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And then what about his wife? I know it's hot in here, I know, I'm sorry. We might could crack a window. But she looked back. She didn't want to give up that life, did she? Maybe she was compassionate about the animals that were being killed, or the babies and the children being killed. And that's why it's important for us as parents. to make sure that we're training our kids the way that they should go. Or they might be those babies in Revelation that are being killed. So it's important for us to teach. Just like Dave was saying today, we have got to get out there and spread the gospel, spread the seed, so that they will not be destroyed. God has given us warning that He's going to do it. And is anybody in here doubt that He's going to do that, what He said? He gives us these examples so that we know that He means what He says. So it's important for us to get out there, because we will, as mothers especially, will be, and fathers you too, I know y'all are compassionate too, but you will, we'll be seeing some hard things when we go through the judgment time. It talks about it. We'll be seeing some really hard things. So you have to decide then, are you going to be able to stay strong with God when people are mad at Him for what's happening? But He tells us in advance that He's going to do it. And so our job is to fervently be out there trying to tell people about Jesus so they don't have to go through it. Okay, and we will get there. It may be, 3 years, Suzanne? We will get there eventually. But it's important to study Revelation with an open heart. And then if you're not, wherever you want to do it, just please be reading it and understanding that. And it's not just Revelation, is it, Suzanne?
No.
Where else is it, Missy, that they can read?
Jeremiah, Daniel,
Where else?
Isaiah,
Where else?
Matthew,
Yes, and Mark. And Thessalonians. And guess what? Almost every single book of the Bible is trying to prepare you for this. So we need to be spending time on it. We need to be getting prepared. So we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah and how it was destroyed. And then we talked about Lot and his daughters that led to the Moab and Ammon. So Moab, just to give you a background on Moab, what the children of one of the wives, one of the daughters becomes the nation of Moab, which is in Jordan now. But they immediately leave God. So remember, did Lot know who Yahweh was? He did. It only takes, remember, 1 to 2 generations to lose your connection with Yahweh. That's why it's so important as parents. We have got to make sure our kids have a connection with Yahweh. So Lot's children did not. They were growing up in a place that was immoral. Thanks, Tad, for going to get that. So they were starting to follow a different god, and his name was Baal. I don't know if y'all heard of him, but this is why I have to think about God's name, because Baal means Lord. That's what it means. And so they're worshiping this god Baal, and he requires child sacrifices. And this is where that black Moabite stone. I don't know if y'all have ever studied much of Islam, but Julia taught a class a few years ago and taught us so much on that. But they go around, there's this place where they think that Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and inside of this box there's a black stone in there, and they all go around and try to touch that stone. They stick their hand, it's really weird, but they stick their hand in to touch this black stone, and they feel like that the stone has turned black. It used to be white, they said, but now it's black because it's covering everybody's sin. It's holding everybody's sin. And so that is what's in that box when you see all those thousands and thousands of people going around. What's that called when they all go there? When all the,
to Mecca.
Mecca. That's what it is. And so that black stone came from this people. So the choices that are made back in, we're still living with those. And so I want you to remember the choices that you're making. It may not be on the world scale as this, but it will be for your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Choices you make now will affect them. And so that's where that black stone came from. And they don't stop being a problem then. When we get the kingdom, when they finally come into the promised land, people from here are still trying to get them to worship someone other than Yahweh. And so King Josiah, he has to tear down stuff from Moab. Ruth, anybody heard of Ruth? That's where she came from. So remember that they were having famine, and so some of the Israelites went over to live in the land of Moab, and that's where Ruth and Naomi were. And so not all of them are bad, right? Ruth is in the lineage of who? Jesus. That's right. So she was a Moabite. And remember, I talked to you guys about the two. This whole book, this whole world is about 2 spiritual kingdoms. What's this one? Babylon and Jerusalem. And you have to choose which one you're going to be a part of. Does God make you be a part of one or the other?
No.
He doesn't. He lets you choose. Ruth chose God's kingdom, even though she was born in Babylon. So you need to keep that in mind. And then we know that God does not forget about Moab. And so in Jeremiah, further on, he talks about the judgment that he's going to bring on them. So he doesn't forget. We're going to hear about them more in the Exodus as they come through. But I wanted you to know who Moab was and where they came from. Because then it helps you understand the story better when you're reading Exodus and it talks about how they won't let them walk through. Then you know. They don't like each other. So already Moab and Ammon and the Ishmaelites, they're already jealous of God's people through Isaac. Already. They're already having friction between the two. And that's still going on today. But they're jealous because God really blesses Isaac and all of those people. So I kind of wanted you to understand that. Ammon, they also have problems. We'll talk about them a little bit more because they also have a role to play. But they are the ones who also come into Israel and they get Israelites to abandon Yahweh and to worship other gods. And who's heard of King Solomon in here? So remember at the end of Solomon's life, remember he was the wisest man in the world. Was he with God when he died?
No.
We don't think so.
Didn't look
And
like
it says that Solomon married an Ammonite woman who was the one who brought in those false gods that got him away. So Ammon and Moab have a part to play. We just read about it in the Bible, about them sleeping with their dad. The incestuous start was wrong from the beginning, and now they lead God's people away. And so I want you to understand that when you understand that history, it helps you understand the story just a little bit better. And as far as we know, they're no longer a people group left from the Ammonites. There might be some of the Moabites, but we don't think there's any people group alive. Specifically, there were Ammonites, but Jordan is now that country. So after that history lesson, I hope that was not too boring for you guys. But for me, that's what helps me understand the Bible, when I understand what these places are and their role that they play. So we're going to summarize this next part. In chapter 20, Abraham and Ahimelech. Remember we talked about before when Abraham was traveling around and his wife was just beautiful. And so he would lie and say what?
My sister.
And technically she was his half-sister. But why did he lie? Why did he do that?
Ready to be killed.
He was fearful.
He was fearful that somebody would want her for a wife. And how old is she, girls and boys? How old is she?
About 90.
Yeah. So they've already had the covenant. They've already had the promise that God was going to give her an offspring, and she laughed. And remember all that we talked about? Well, let's see what they think about that. Let's see if they remembered that promise that they were given. So as we're coming through here, they're having to move around because of trouble finding food and things like that. So Abraham in chapter 20 says that I'm going to tell the king that you're my sister. And have you guys read this before, or do we need to read this out loud? Y'all know how I like to summarize, but if you haven't read it, we need to read it because it's best to hear it in God's Word.
This is the second time he does that.
Second time.
At least in the,
That's right. But this is the first time we think after he received the promise.
right.
So
He
he's
did it in
received-
Egypt, way back.
And this is down in this area right here. It's down in this area right in here, right around in the Philistine area is where this is happening, down in this area here. But Ryan was talking about how it happened in Egypt before. And they were going to go to Egypt again. And God told them, no, don't go down there. Stay around this land that I will show you. But this is what happens. Let's just read it. It's easier to read it. Chapter 20. Somebody read for me.
Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman.
Why do you think God did that? Ryan, I'm rude when we read. I stop you a lot. Why do you think that God did that? Why did he intervene right here?
protect their marriage.
Well, yeah, he made a promise, and if something had gone off here, the promise wouldn't be kept. He had to keep, this is the only way to keep the promise on track.
So what was the promise again? Just to make sure everybody remembers.
That Sarah would bear a son from Abraham, so this would have derailed that.
This would have derailed that. So this is, God is intervening here. When God has a plan and He says it, He will intervene. Well, does He still do that today, though? I mean, this was a long time ago. Does He still intervene today? I believe, yes, He does. Does He have a will for your life? Yes, He does. So God intervenes here and He says, He's coming to that sky. He's going to freak him out. Let's keep reading.
Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister, and didn't she also say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all of yours will die.
Don't you love that? Shows God's mercy right there. His mercy and grace. All the way back here. That He knew that he was innocent from man's standards. So He's intervening and He's giving him a chance to do the right thing. Now, fortunately, as we read the story, you're going to see He does. But if He doesn't, God is prepared to destroy these people. Okay.
Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother.
Oh my goodness, we could spend the rest of class on that, couldn't we? So I want you to think, yes, Ben.
I mean, it is 11:18.
Okay. That gives me like minus 3 minutes.
So yeah, we canceled the rest of the class.
Okay, smarty. All right. So, did you push start on that? Oh, thank you, Rachel. I forgot to say that. We were like, we missed the whole class. So we'll have to hold on to that till next week. Y'all think about that and think about you and how you're going through this life and what are you compromising on? And what are you scared? Are you scared to show your Christian faith? Are you scared to show that you belong to Jesus? So I want you to be thinking about yourself. We love to be hard on Abraham, but let's think about ourselves too. And as we're going through this, we have promises too. So thank you guys so much for coming, and we'll see y'all next week.